right. This is not in the right place. Sorry about that. Okay. These are not the right. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to change this. All right. So actually today, don't pay attention to the objective and the essential question, but we are looking at the title of today's lesson, The Theory of Evolution and Its Evidence. So we're going to talk about the evidence that exists to support this theory of evolution. I love what I see Rudy doing. He's taking his notebook out. I love that Gloria already has her notes out. I see Ayana has her notes out. Everybody should have some way of taking notes, even if it's going to be virtual. Everybody should have some way of taking notes, even if it's going to be virtual. Everybody should have some way of taking notes, even if it's going to be virtual. What'd you say? Which what? Building? Yeah, this is the 400 building. Today is the 4th day of our 8th unit. Keep in mind, Tuesday will be our Unit 8 exam. Tuesday will be the Unit 8 exam. That's going to be April 20th. All right, so we have a little bit more to go in this unit. 5 standards in this unit, but they overlap with each other a good amount. So that's a good thing. Okay. Now, before we talk about this lesson specifically, I do want to mention to several of you, I won't say names, but you all know who you are. Many of you are missing the Unit 7 test. Why is this a big deal? This is a big deal because the unit tests are formal grades, as you all know, and they do go into the grade book, and they're weighted heavily because they're formal grades. So I need you all to make sure that you're checking PowerSchool. What you see in PowerSchool is updated up through the end of Unit 7. So if you did not take that Unit 7 test, you need to make sure that you schedule a time with me to do so. All right, please make sure you reach out. It could be through email. You can call me, text me, send me a remind message. For those of you who are here in person, take some time to check PowerSchool today before the class period is over. And if you see you're missing the exam, come talk to me. Okay. All right, so a little bit of warm-up review. So the last question in today's warm-up was this. It says eukaryotic autotrophs contain both chloroplasts and mitochondria within their cells. Okay, big words already. So we want to start thinking about test-taking strategies. When we're taking tests, we want to be in the habit of defining terms that we don't know. Brianna, are you with me? Cool. Just making sure. We want to be able to define the terms that we don't know. So we see eukaryotic, I see autotrophs, I see chloroplasts, I see mitochondria. If we don't know what those words mean, then we might lose some confidence in our ability to answer this question just in that very first sentence, all right? Let me read the actual question and then we'll talk more about it. But you always want to be able to understand the question before you even start considering the answer choices. So the actual question says, which best describes how these two organelles are dependent on one another in these specific organisms? So we want to know how are chloroplasts and mitochondria dependent on one another. So I haven't even revealed the answer choices. Obviously, if you guys did the warm-up, then you know what the answer choices are. But the reason I haven't revealed the answer choices is because when you're taking a test, you want to understand the question before you look at the answer choices. Sometimes the answer choices will confuse you, or you see something and you're like, oh, that sounds right, without ever actually considering if it answers the question. So you don't want to fall into that trap. So before we even look at the answer choices, can we make a prediction about what the answer should be? Does anybody know anything useful about chloroplasts or mitochondria? What do chloroplasts do? Now, in an ideal setting, you all would have, what do we call them? Brain dumps. And this is what I would think a good brain dump would look like for this specific question. I'm literally going to split up my piece of paper or a section of my paper into 2 halves. So I've got mitochondria on the left. I guess that's on the right. Chloroplasts on the left. What do we know about these two organisms? Somebody's got to know something. What do we remember? See, we're in the last month. We have to review. We have to review. So we're going to start doing this a lot more often. Anything. Glucose. Where do you think I should write that? Okay. And why should I write it under chloroplasts, Rudy? Good. Excellent. And again, if you're actually taking a test, this is a great strategy to do. I know it takes time, but you guys are going to have 65 questions and you'll have 180 minutes. That's plenty of time to take your time, slow down, take notes as you move through the test. You can use as much scratch paper as possible. There are no rules against using it when you take the EOC. So literally take notes as you go, and they will be helpful to you as you move throughout the test. What else might I write on the board in my brain dump? What else could be helpful to me here? Ideally, you guys have notes that you took way back when in Unit 2. Maybe you could refer back to your Unit 2 notes. Way back in February. Shoot. Okay, so this is all we know about two organelles. Yes, Brianna. Thank you. I appreciate you. That's like the number one thing that people in their 30s will remember, I promise you, about biology many years from now. What does that mean to be the powerhouse of the cell? Yes, excellent. Mitochondria make ATP. ATP is a chemical compound that basically is just energy. It is cellular energy. Excellent job, Rudy. Thank you, Sade. Brian, you had your hand raised. That's what you were going to say? Okay. Where do I find these organelles? Does every cell, does every living cell have these? Only plant cells. Good. Thank you. How did you know that, Sade? Excellent. We make our own food. We don't need to make our own. I'm sorry. We find food. We don't need to make our own food. All right. Plants don't have the ability to go out and eat other things, so they have to make their own food, which is in this case glucose. That's what Rudy told us about. So there's a word on the screen that means make their own food. Organisms that make their own food. What word is that? Good. Thank you. Autotrophs is a word that means an organism that makes its own food. That's why we have the prefix auto, A-U-T-O. That means self. So they make food for themselves. This is great stuff to write down, folks. If you don't know this stuff, Braylon, or anybody else, if you don't know this stuff, you might want to write it down. It's great review. Again, we're in the last month, guys, before the EOC exam. We've got 5 weeks left. We need to review every day. Every day. So if you don't know this or you didn't remember this, it's great to write down. Anything else that we want to include? Good. Yeah. That's excellent. Thank you. We only find mitochondria in eukaryotic cells. What is a eukaryotic cell? What's special about them? What's special about a eukaryotic cell? They're more complex, yeah. And they're more complex because of what? What makes them complex? In the interest of time, I'm just going to say it. But thank you, Rudy. They're more complex because they have a nucleus. Only eukaryotic cells have nuclei. All right. Last question. I think this will basically lead us to the answer. How do organisms make energy? What do you need to make energy? Even just think about human beings. What do we need to do to make energy? We need the sun. We need water. What else? What do we need to make energy? To stay energized? We need food. And in this case, what did I say food is? What's the fancy word for food here? Glucose. Good. So we need H2O and glucose to make ATP. Really? Okay, I'll leave it at that for now. So I think this is a great starting point, and this is what I want you all to be in the habit of doing. I know this is kind of difficult for some of you to see, but hopefully you can see it on the screen behind me if you're at home. This is what we need to be in the habit of doing when we're taking our test. Take your time. It really doesn't matter if you need to take a long time on these tests. I'd rather see you do well than be concerned about the time limit. Okay, so we've got enough information here to attack this problem now. We're ready to look at the answer choices. Hey, the See, the mitochondria is responsible for having. We didn't talk about genetics at all. These two organelles aren't really responsible for genetics, not responsible for protein. So I'm going to cross that one out. Here's a good study, or a good test taking tip. When you notice that there are two questions that are almost basically the opposite, more often than not, one of those, because it's going to be hard for two things that are total opposites of one to both be wrong. So in this case, we're looking at this first one, the chloroplasts are responsible for creating glucose. The second one says mitochondria are responsible for creating. And we see that. The first one says mitochondria goes to making. The second one says chloroplasts. And it pushed it. You see that? So the good is to realize opposite of one another, or that kind of switch information. More likely than not, one of them. Does that make sense? So which one? Which one of these A and B? No, it's has to be. Which one fits with the information that we have? C. C does. Good. What information do you like in C? What information? It literally says the chloroplasts make glucose. It's responsible for creating glucose. So C is the correct answer. All right, and this is how, again, that some time. If you were working on this by yourself and you weren't, listening to me and waiting for me to ask questions, it wouldn't take this long. But I do want you all to get in the habit of making your brain dumps, taking notes, learning from the test. Learn from the test. As you go, the test is going to reveal specific information to you, and you could pick up on it and use it to answer other questions. All right, so that's what really successful test takers do. Good job, good job. All right, now we'll get into some new stuff. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about evolution today. We've got 3 quick definitions we're going to write down. I don't need you to write the stuff at the bottom. Even though it is highlighted, don't worry about writing it down. So coevolution. Coevolution is the joint evolution of 2 or more species. In fact, just write down that very first sentence, the joint evolution of 2 or more species. We'll talk more about this later on in the course. Take a note. Next time. And then we do see some examples on the bottom. For example, bee with its mouth that is perfectly shaped to fit into the center of the flower to be able to get the pollen or the nectar and then spread the pollen. Then we see specific butterflies that use what's called mimicry. So some butterflies are not actually poisonous, but they resemble poisonous butterflies. And so this, of course, scares away predators. So coevolution is when 2 or more species are evolving together. Pretty simple. Next slide. All right, now it's important to note when we think about evolution, first of all, evolution does not take place over a short period of time. We're not talking about 10 years. We're not talking about 100 years. In most cases, we're not talking about even 1,000 years. We're talking about dozens of thousands of years or hundreds of thousands of years. So we know that in the history of the planet Earth, we've dated the planet Earth at this point. We know it's about 4.3 billion years old. For the first billion years or so, life did not exist on planet Earth, and the Earth was still being bombarded by asteroids and a lot of ice, and the ice would just burn up on its way to or through the atmosphere. But eventually, the atmosphere kind of cooled off, and so the water started to accumulate. But anyway, over the course of the lifespan of the Earth, the continents on the Earth have spread out. What used to exist was a supercontinent called Pangaea. And over time, all of the sections of Pangaea have split up. They've become fractured, and now they have moved, across the globe. This happens because of tectonic plates that exist under the surface of the Earth. These are the same things that cause earthquakes and, in some cases, tsunamis today. But they also cause land to actually shift. So over the course of millions of years, we know that continents have moved. This we know because there are some species that exist, for example, in South Africa that also exist in southern South America. You might see them in Uruguay, but you also see those same species in South Africa. So, of course, the species didn't travel over thousands of miles of water. They didn't swim over thousands of miles of water. This is evidence of the fact that the continents themselves used to actually be connected. So we can see the same alligators in South Africa that we see in South America. We can see the same species of plants in Australia that we see in Madagascar. Of course, plants do not swim, and the wind is not going to blow them over thousands of miles of water. So this is evidence of the fact that they had to have, at one point, those two continents had to have been near one another. Okay, so this is the concept of Pangaea. And it's a crucial source of evidence for evolution. Okay. Speciation is the formation of a new and distinct species. And then one of the causes of speciation is called geographic isolation. Geographic isolation is exactly what it sounds like. When two populations of the same species literally get separated and they become isolated from one another. For whatever reason, they can no longer be in contact with one another. They can't mate together. They don't communicate. They're not sharing genes at all. They're not having offspring together. This means that over time, because of their separated environments, they might start to develop some differences and they might eventually become two different species. So even though they started off as a singular species, they might eventually become two different species. This is going to be a result of, a result of the fact that they might have different food availability. They might have different predators coming after them. They might be subject to different temperatures or different weather events. So all of these things contribute to what started off as one species eventually becoming two distinct species. And when they become two distinct species, that means even if we put them in the same space again, they won't successfully mate. Yes, sir. Okay. All right. So one of the more important evidences of evolution is fossil evidence. And this is really the evidence that we've relied upon for the last 300 years or so. People have been discovering fossils for a long, long time. We didn't necessarily have the means to analyze them that we now do, but they are still useful to us. And a fossil is the preserved remains or impressions or traces of dead organisms from a past geological age. So, why is this strong evidence? Well, this is strong evidence because we can find fossils of organisms that are no longer living today, but they show that they have strong similarities with species that do still survive today. So, finding a fossil might bring us closer to making a link between a species that lived 3 million years ago and a species that is still living today. We might find that they have a similar body structure. They might have similar anatomy, and we'll talk about that as well. So, no need to write this down, but fossils provide evidence that life evolved from simple to more complex forms. Life moved from water to land, and life has existed for about 4 billion years. Now, when we say the life that existed 4 billion years ago, you and I might not even be able to recognize as life. It would have been largely unicellular. It would have had, no recognizable central nervous system to actually be able to think or to process or to make decisions about things. But it did have the ability to make its own food. It had the ability to transport itself. Um, and so that early life did have many of the features that we still need today. It had the ability to do respiration to make energy. And that obviously is something that life, even today, still needs to be able to do. So on the left, you can see the fossil of one of the earliest land dwelling photosynthetic plants. So that's a huge find because we know that for a long time, life could not exist on land. There was no oxygen in the atmosphere. There was not enough oxygen in the atmosphere to support life. So finding this fossil, this is a photosynthetic organism, meaning that it did need oxygen. It used oxygen in order to make glucose. I'm sorry, it used carbon dioxide to make glucose and it produced oxygen. All right, so that's a big, big find. Then we see a fossil of a fish with the fins joined to the body by a singular bone. So this is actually a precursor of tetrapods, like you and I. We're tetrapods. Organisms that have 4 limbs are called tetrapods. And then on the right, you can see something called the Lotali footprints. And these footprints are about 3.7 million years old. They had to have been left by an ancient ancestor of humans. If you look at the shape of the imprints, you can notice that they look kind of like modern feet. course, they weren't exactly Homo sapiens, but they were probably an ancient ancestor of Homo sapiens. Cool stuff. All right, so the rock layers are obviously an important asset of or aspect of being able to look at this fossil evidence. So on the image or in the image on the right, you can see 4 layers. Which layer is the oldest, do you think? Yeah, number 4, also labeled as D. So which is the youngest in that case? Number 1, also labeled as A. So we know that the older surfaces or the older rocks end up getting subverted under new rock. So old rock kind of gets pushed under and new rock comes on top of it. Old rock gets pushed under, new rock comes on top of it. Okay, so you can see this, in natural landscapes, even here in the United States, in the western parts of the United States, you can literally see rock layers where the coloration is different because they're coming from a different geological age. The second source of evidence for evolution is called comparative anatomy. Comparative anatomy. Comparative anatomy are organs and skeletal structures that appear in the bodies of various species across multiple phyla and classes. And this suggests that they share a common ancestor. So, of course, with mammals, we see many of the same features. Mammals all have mammary glands, which means that their females can produce milk for their offspring. They all have a neocortex, which is a region in the brain. Now, keep in mind that mammals are still a pretty wide ranging class. You find squirrels and deer and polar bears and anteaters and human beings and kangaroos. These are all mammals. So, of course, you wouldn't necessarily say that they are that similar, but they do have similar structures. This hints at the fact that there was probably a singular common ancestor. One of those ancestors is thought to have been Tiktaalik rosai, and that's what you're seeing on the screen. It's lived 375 million years ago, which in the grand scheme of things is not that long ago. Like I said, the Earth is about 4.4 billion years old. Tiktaalik rosai represents a transition between fish that only lived underwater and early tetrapods that were able to kind of walk on land. Okay, so we have found fossil evidence of Tiktaalik. We have been able to, of course, this is not a real picture. This is just like a 3D rendering or a painting, basically. But we know from the fossil record that this organism did have similar skeletal structures to modern day reptiles and amphibians. Some of those structures include wrist joints, which of course are not common in fish. You don't really see fish with wrist joints. It also had rib bones, lungs. Of course, fish have gills. They don't have internal lungs that actually are the site of gas exchange. They have an ear region. They also have a mobile neck. So if you think about it, fish do not have the ability to turn their heads. They have to actually move their entire bodies in order to change the direction of their heads. This organism, Tiktaalik, had the ability to actually move its head without moving its entire body. All right, so let's do a quick scientific name review. What is that portion of the name? What does that represent? Tiktaalik. Which of the 8 levels of classification is it? We just talked about this on Monday. It's the genus. Thank you, Rudy. And then, so what is that portion of the name? Rosai. What's that called? That's the species, okay? So this is how we write scientific names, and we talked about this on Monday. You always write the genus first, you write the species second, you italicize both words, and you capitalize the genus. Okay, so thank you, Rudy, our resident genius. See what I did there? All right. The third type of evidence is called homologous structures. Wait, no, I'm sorry. This is not the third type, but this is just kind of another way to say comparative anatomy. So homologous structures are similar anatomic features between different species. So they might have different functions, but because they have similar structures, they suggest a common ancestor. The word homologous, we see homo. That's a prefix we're familiar with. Homo, that means same. And logo means shape in this case. So same shape. Same thing, basically. So in that image on your screen, we can see the human arm on the far left. We see the forelimb of a dog. Then we see the fin of a dolphin, and then we see the fin of a dolphin, and then we see the wing of a bat. So all 4 of these species are mammals, but of course we wouldn't necessarily think of them as being particularly similar. Of course, dolphins live underwater. Humans and dogs are land bound, and bats have the ability to fly. So we don't necessarily think of these species as being similar. But when we look at the bones in their respective limbs, we do see similarities. All 4 of the species have a long bone in the upper portion of their limb. In humans, we call that long bone the humerus. All 4 species have 2 bones in their forearm region, or in the region between their long bone and their extremities. In humans, those 2 bones are called the radius. That's the bone that's on your thumb side. And the ulna, that's the bone that's on the side of your pinky finger. All 4 species have carpals, which are small fragmented bones that form in humans the wrist and give us a good amount of mobility. All 4 species have metacarpals as well as phalanges. Metacarpals in humans make up the bones in our hand. So when people say I broke my hand, what they've actually broken is one or more of their metacarpals. And then your phalanges are your fingers. So we can see with this helpful coloration that those same structures appear in various mammal species. Another part of comparative anatomy are vestigial structures. So we had homologous structures, and we also have vestigial structures. A vestigial structure is an anatomic feature that may have had some ancestral function, but it has lost all function in the living species. So think about it. Why do many of us have so much body hair? We don't need that body hair. It doesn't really do much for us because in the year 2021, to stay warm, we just put on clothes. And we can wear jackets and coats and pants and boots and long socks to stay warm. But our ancestors may not have had that ability. So the body hair was a primary source of protection from the cold for them. Ear muscles. You're going to see a video about ear muscles, but some of you might have noticed that if you hear a sound kind of off in the distance to one side of your head, your ear kind of jumps a little bit. Does anybody notice that? Or if you try to raise your eyebrows, you can feel your ears moving a little bit too. That's not just because your eyebrows are pulling your ears, it's because you have muscles that move your ears. Can anybody think about why that is? Does anybody have a pet at home? What do you have, Ayana? A cat? So have you ever seen your cat's ears kind of like shoot to one side like that or perk up if they hear something? We also, our ancestors used to have that ability too. Of course, it was kind of a protective function. Instead of having to move your whole body in order to better hear something, your ear could just move for you, right? So you could still be relatively quiet, but you might be able to better detect a predator or a prey. Okay, so we still have muscles behind our ears, even though they don't really serve us any function. And then we also see other vestigial structures, wisdom teeth. That's why when you reach a certain age, you should get your wisdom teeth taken out because they don't do anything for you. Your appendix, if you've ever heard of someone having an appendectomy, or you hear someone say, my appendix burst and I need to get my appendix removed, that's no big deal because the appendix doesn't do anything for us. It doesn't provide any function. So we can have it surgically removed and you can go on about your life like nothing happened. Your coccyx is a bone at the bottom of your spine. So you can feel it, just kind of above your butt. That used to be the beginning of a tail. Of course, most human beings do not have tails. So again, it's a vestigial structure. Okay, the third source of evidence is called comparative biochemistry. This is potentially the most important source because it's very, very accurate. It's very precise. Comparative biochemistry is analysis of DNA or proteins for similarities between two different species in order to determine their common ancestry. So the more DNA that two species have in common, the more closely related they are, or the more amino acids they have in common, the more proteins they have in common, the more common their ancestor, the more closely related they are. All right, so again, we can literally count, and you all will do this as a part of your activity today. You can literally count how many amino acids two species have in common, and you can figure out how closely related they are. Okay, so here's what it looks like. And we've done this before with DNA fingerprinting. So this is a throwback question. So we want to know which species is most closely related to species one. We're literally going to count them. So if we look at that very first band of DNA at the top, species two, species three, and species four all have that one in common with species one. All right, so that means that they have one similarity there. Then we literally look at the next band. So again, we're trying to find out what their relation is with species one. So we're looking at the bands that species one has. Looks like all three of them have that in common with species one as well. So there's two similarities. With this third band, only species three shares it with species one. All right, so now species three is in the lead. We're going to keep going. Notice that I skipped a band. Why? Because it was not present in species one. Hi, Ardesia. All right, so we're going. We're just going to keep counting. Skip it here. All right. So which species is most closely related to species one? When we look at their number of similarities. Species three. Yeah, it's got 8 similarities, whereas species 2 and 4 only have 5 similarities apiece. Species 3 is most closely related. Pretty simple. All right, the last evidence of evolution is comparative embryology. So we're comparing the embryos of different species. Of course, an embryo is an offspring in the earliest stages of its development. Oh, gosh. All right, so if we're just looking at this image, Can you tell what these species are? Does anybody think they know what these species are just looking at this very, very early embryo? We see that they have gill slits and they have tails. Any guesses? Would you say, Ayana? A frog, okay. Let's see. I think there might be, one of them might be a frog. Which one do you think it is? I can't remember. All right, what about now? So this is mid-stage embryo. You see one of them is starting to develop forelimbs and hind limbs. Or at least, actually, two or three of them have forelimbs or hind limbs. Any guesses at this point in mid-stage? The second one is a what? Okay. Let's see. So here's what they actually are. That's a fish on the far left. Salamander is the second one. A tortoise in the middle. That's a chicken in the fourth position. And then a human being in the far right. So believe it or not, when you look at the earliest stages of development, all of these species look pretty similar. And we've got two mammals here, the human and the chicken. Actually, chickens are birds. So we've got a mammal, we've got a bird, we've got two reptiles, or is it salamander? What is a okay, we've got a reptile, we've got an amphibian, and we've got a fish. So we've got 5 different classes represented here, but they all look basically the same as embryos. That's evidence of evolution. That's evidence that they share a common ancestor, that all life kind of started in the same ways. Pretty remarkable. All right, now there's a process. This is a throwback question. There's a process that takes place in the very early stages of embryonic development. And this process creates different types of cells. It creates different tissues and organs. Does anybody remember what that process is called? It creates different types of cells. The process is called cell specialization. You might have also heard it referred to as cell differentiation. This is when different genes are activated, and those different genes cause cells to have different jobs. All right, so we have a lot of reviewing to do, whole lot. I'm just going to reveal this answer. So again, the biochemistry is the most important type of evidence because it's much more sophisticated. It's much more accurate. Actually being able to look at the DNA of species is most important. Okay, so let's take a look at these vestigial structures.
Your body is a temple, but it's also a museum of natural history. Look closely and you'll see parts that aren't there because you need them, but because your animal ancestors did. No longer serving their previous function, but not costly enough to have disappeared. These remnants of our deep history only make sense within the framework of evolution by natural selection. With your arm on a flat surface, push your thumb against your pinky and tip your hand slightly up. If you see a raised band in the middle of your wrist, you've got a vestigial muscle in your forearm. That tendon you see connects to the palmaris longus, a muscle that around 10 to 15% of people are missing on one or both of their arms. It doesn't make them any weaker though. There's no difference in grip strength. In fact, it's one of the first tendons that surgeons will take out so that they can use it in reconstructive and cosmetic surgeries. You can find the palmaris longus across mammal species, but it's most developed among those that use their forelimbs to move around. In primates, that means the muscle is longer in lemurs and monkeys and shorter in chimps, gorillas, and other apes that don't do a lot of scrambling through trees. It's not the only leftover muscle that we've got. Look at the 3 that are attached to our outer ear. We can't get much movement out of these muscles, especially compared to some of our mammal relatives who use them to locate the sources of sounds. Presumably, this would have been quite helpful for early nocturnal mammals. In humans, you can still detect the remnants of this adaptation with electrodes. In one study, researchers recorded a spike of activity in the ear muscle cells in response to a sudden sound. Not enough to move the ear, but detectable. And you can probably guess the location of the sound based on these results. It came from a speaker placed to the left of the study subjects. So this is their left ear subconsciously trying and failing to pivot toward the sound. You can see another futile effort by our vestigial body parts when you get goosebumps. When we're cold, tiny muscles attached to our body hairs contract, pulling the hair upright, which causes the surrounding skin to form a bump. For our furry mammal relatives, the raised hair increases the amount of space for insulation, helping them stay warm. Birds can do this too. You've probably seen a puffy pigeon on a cold day. Adrenaline is one of the hormones involved in the body's response to cold temperatures, and it's also part of the fight or flight response. So it helps some animals appear larger when they're threatened. And it may be why surprising and emotional turns in music can give some people goosebumps. And then there's our tail. At the end of our spine are a set of fused vertebrae. Some people have 3, some people have 5. We call it the tailbone. It now serves as an anchor for some pelvic muscles, but it's also what's left of our ancestors' tails. Every one of us actually had a tail at one point when the basic body plan is being laid out at around 4 weeks of gestation. Human embryos closely resemble embryos of other vertebrates, and that includes a tail with 10 to 12 developing vertebrae. In many other animals, it continues to develop into a proper tail. But in humans and other apes, the cells in the tail are programmed to die a few weeks after they appear. Very rarely, though, a mutation allows the ancestral blueprint to prevail, and a human baby will be born with a true vestigial tail. The most adorable vestigial behavior is the palmar grasp reflex, where infants up until they're about 6 months old have this incredible grasp on whatever you put in their hand. There's a similar reflex for their feet. I wanted to show you this great piece of footage from the 1930s where they demonstrated this behavior. These babies are only 1 month old, and you can see that their inner monkey can support their entire weight.
Knock out the exit ticket. We've got 5 minutes left. That's plenty of time to do the exit ticket. There is an assignment. It's called Evidence of Evolution. It's also pretty quick. I think it'll take you 10 minutes. So if you've got time during hawk time, I would knock that out as well, just so you don't have to worry about it going forward. Several of these assignments here I'm not actually going to give you, so I need to delete them. But for now, just focus on the day 4 exit ticket. You can get that done in the next 5 minutes. You will be in a good place. you do the exit ticket? See you all. Have a good day. Thank you. See you, Pedro. See you, Chandler. See you, Ayana.